So what I wanted to talk about today in this session is really, I suppose, the challenge of the cloud. In particular, the fact, as I mentioned earlier, it's coming whether we like it or not. It's something that our IT colleagues are investing in, and we're only just finding out about. Talking to a number of people, people have gone, yeah, somebody's told me we bought Office 365 and I didn't know. And it's actually quite a confronting thing. I mean, how are we going to deal with these challenges going forward? Before we get into it, and I didn't do this earlier in the interest of time, but just to explain who RecordPoint is. We're a globally based software company that focuses on records management in both SharePoint and Office 365. And I'm going to talk about Office 365 today. So we've got offices in Sydney, London and Seattle. We have a very close relationship with Microsoft. So some of the themes that I'm talking about today really are things that we're seeing coming out of Seattle, out of the Microsoft head offices, and trying to talk about how do we manage those particular challenges, because the technology landscape...
Sorry, Miles, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, we're going to have to put the speaker off because we can't hear over there. Could I ask everybody if you could come a little bit closer, please? And Miles, I'm terribly sorry.
No,
we're going to
fine.
have to ask you to... in fact, if we put it down, it might be better.
So yeah, we're seeing a lot of things coming out of Microsoft and hearing a lot of things about new technologies that are coming through, and you'll start to hear about some of these, particularly if you're Microsoft customers using Office 365. They're actually quite exciting technologies from a records perspective, in my view, and an information management point of view. There's things like machine learning, the Office graph, which allows you to sort of see relationships between users and the information and make suggestions on documents that you might be interested in based on the relationships that you have in an organization. Machine learning, which can extract information out of documents and actually, again, make suggestions on documents you might be interested in. Really powerful tools, but somewhat confronting when you don't know anything about them and the pace of change is so rapid. So I suppose the first premise of my talk today is that records are being created and stored everywhere, whether we like it or not. As I said in my earlier presentation, the concept of the filing cabinet, this repository where if we put our stuff, that it will be managed and it will be safe and we can retain it and manage it appropriately. I think those days are gone. We actually can't manage content in that way anymore. It's the actual explosion of content, going again back to the Rubik's Cube. We've got different types of content existing in different repositories, whether that's a file share, whether that's in a cloud service. And that cloud service could be content that you're managing directly, or it could be managed by a third-party provider. I mean, thinking of some of the things we just discussed that Frank covered off in his security talk, imagine dealing with the controls that you need to put around things like SaaS services. If somebody's using Dropbox or Box, suddenly that comes into view. That's a really difficult thing to deal with, both from an information security point of view, but also from a records point of view. So we've got cloud, we've got SaaS services more generally, we've got different types of content. It's an incredibly complex world. So what's driving these changes in the content landscape? And I'm taking, I suppose, a government point of view here, but you can sort of look at it from a broader private commercial organisation point of view as well. But we've got things out there such as G-Cloud. The UK government introduced G-Cloud a few years ago. I think we're up to G-Cloud 7 now. And there's this mandate around cloud first, which as government organisations, you're supposed to consider cloud before you consider on-premise solutions as a means of saving money, consolidating services across many organisations potentially. Even people like the Ministry of Defence moving to Office 365. I mean, that to me suggests that cloud really is here. If somebody who has the requirements of somebody like the MOD in terms of the management and security of content has moved to the cloud, that means everybody is ready for it. There's very few organisations who can now say, well, we can't go to the cloud because of security or other concerns, if somebody like the MOD is. And finally, from a Scottish perspective, Scottish government's pushing public sector to embrace cloud as well. You're under direct pressure here locally in that regard. So there's an expectation that cloud will be the first thing that you look at as opposed to the last thing you look at. I mean, more broadly, just to go back to some of those themes that I mentioned earlier, and users driving this, there's an expectation from users that they will want these services, that they will want to be able to use the tools that they choose. Remember, we're dealing with a generation now that's grown up with things like social media, services like Facebook, services like Twitter, services like Dropbox. They're part of people's Instagram, etc. They're part of people's lives now, and there's an expectation that business services will work in a similar way to those personal services. Why is it hard for me to use the system? Why do I have to be trained? I don't have to be trained to use Facebook. I don't have to be trained to use Dropbox. I shouldn't need training. So again, an emphasis on usability and the ability to get to that content anywhere as well. I can get to Facebook on my phone. Why can't I get to my documents on my phone? And those are reasonable things, but obviously challenging for organizations in terms of meeting those expectations and also managing the security around those things. More broadly, and again from an economic point of view, governments need to lower the cost to deploy new applications. As many of you have been involved in IRMS projects know, they're big, nasty things. They take a while. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of design involved. And I suppose, you know, it's looking at it simplistically, the ability to turn on a service and off you go, perhaps with some configuration, is very appealing. It drives out a lot of that cost. So again, we're in a situation where these services are purported to solve a number of these issues. However, they're not really being thought about in the context of good information management, good records management, or even good information security. The next theme there of needing to lower time to roll out applications, again, really sort of extends from that. We need to get this out now. We need to provide this control now. We need to provide this service now. The expectation that you can take a year to roll out a solution, you don't have that luxury anymore. And then obviously lowering the ongoing cost of these applications. Why have I got all these guys who manage hardware? Why should I pay for that? Why can't I outsource that? Why can't I leave that to somebody that can do it probably more efficiently? I mean, security is an interesting one in that regard, in that you know, there's an assumption that somehow if I control my content in my servers on my premises, it's somehow more secure than saying hosting something in a Microsoft Azure or an Amazon data center where they have guys 24/7 and they're just focused on information security. So the idea of security potentially as a blocker to that's disappearing as well. So thinking about this transition to the cloud, and we've talked about a concept within RecordPoint of the private cloud, and that might just be on premises or something that you manage yourself with a hosted solution potentially. But think about this as a transition, because turning on the cloud instantly and saying, well, we're going to get rid of all this on-premises stuff, we're going to close down our old EDRMS, and we're going to move it all out to Office 365 and manage it out there tomorrow. Clearly that's not going to happen. So looking at what that path looks like and thinking about where you are at in this journey and where you want to be. So just to go through this slide, if we look at the private cloud, really that's about a traditional on-premises solution or a hosted solution where you're controlling access to the servers, you're controlling that information, it's self-managed. You then see at the other end, the other extent, the public cloud. So that's a pure cloud solution. We have no infrastructure, we're managing all of our content in the cloud, and that normally works okay with greenfields organizations or small organizations. It's not, again, necessarily completely practical, certainly not in the short term for most large organizations. So the truth we see in the medium term is going to lie somewhere in the middle, this concept of a hybrid cloud, where there'll be some stuff that you're still managing on premises as you traditionally would. And that might be for very good reasons as well. I mean, think about some of the content and the records that you manage. You might have the crown jewels hosted on site because you need to control that because there's risk around those things. But you might look to actually put out some of the lower value content out into the cloud because there's cost efficiencies of doing that and managing it out there. And you might want it out there because you can share content with suppliers more easily. You know, setting up extranets used to be, and to an extent still is, painful. You move to a cloud model, all it is security changes, and suddenly you can share content with other parties much more easily. So what we're seeing is this hybrid model as probably being the most likely in the short term, and looking at how you can leverage the economies of scale and the benefits of cloud without having to do some massive big bang project of moving all of your content, moving all of your services out to the cloud immediately. So if we drill into these concepts a little bit more, talk about the private cloud. Nothing's held externally. I've got my servers on premises. I'm managing some file systems and network drives potentially. You know, and that thing in my private cloud could be my existing EDRMS solution. You know, traditional systems such as a Trim or an Objective, OpenText, etc. Or SharePoint, to be fair. So next we move to sort of this private cloud public infrastructure model, where I've actually moved it off premises, and I'm asking a service provider to manage my servers, provide light and power, provide those basic services, but I'm still effectively managing the content and the application that sits out there in that private cloud, but that's based on this managed service type model. And again, I'm probably still, and I'll keep returning to this because it's a problem that I think all organizations have, I will still have my file system and network drive stuff there in the corner that I don't really want to talk about because it's too painful and I don't really want to transition off it. And we talk about the hybrid cloud, and I'm going to use a Microsoft example here as that's the thing that we know best. I might have my on-premises system still, perhaps SharePoint in this case, and I'm managing that because I've invested already heavily in it, and I want to actually sweat that particular asset. I want to keep it there for the duration of its life. But I do want to start moving out to the cloud because I can see that as the future. So being able to then apply and set up an Office 365 tenant as an example, where I can start to manage content in that cloud environment, but also manage my content down here on premises. So you're starting to see a problem here from a records management point of view. Great, I've got 2 repositories to manage, and I've still got my file shares as well to bring those back into the picture. So suddenly you've got this problem of having to manage multiple sources of information. And then we might add things in like Facebook and Twitter into that equation. I mean, I think, certainly in my experience, we're starting to see a lot of our customers who are saying, our Facebook page that we use to communicate to citizens or to stakeholders or to customers, or our Twitter feed, those things are records. Those are things that we should manage as part of our broader information management policies and our records management policies. So again, I've got, all right, so now I've got social media, I've got my file shares, I've got Office 365, and I've got my on-premise solution. This is starting to look like you guys are going to have to hire bigger teams. I don't think that's going to happen, but you could try. And then finally, we've got the public cloud. Everything's out in the cloud. Having said that, there's still a diversity of systems here. I've still got Facebook, I might have Yammer, I might have Office 365, I might have SharePoint out in the cloud. I might still have my file systems potentially. I could even potentially put them in the cloud. I could buy some storage and put them out there. But I'm still managing diverse sets of content. I've not solved my problem of bringing that all together and managing it as a whole. And if I throw in things there like Box and Dropbox, you know, I was talking to a customer in Melbourne in Australia a few weeks ago, government department and state government down there, and they have their deputy secretary in the department using Dropbox to share content with other deputy secretaries and other departments. And, you know, he obviously saw the look of horror on my face. I mean, I'm sure you guys would be horrified too. What the hell is he sharing in that Dropbox account, and what control has he got around it? And the answer is nothing. But the challenge there is he uses it because it makes sense for him to use it. It's an easy solution to use, it's usable, it meets a business need for him. So my challenge back is probably not to say you can't do that, but how do we manage and control that rather than try and stop him from doing that? So yeah, what does this all mean for records managers? It's a mess. I've got stuff everywhere, both internally and externally. I mean, I've added an extra thing in there, Skype for Business, which some of you may know as Link. Oh, because of the background noise. There are some seats here. Sorry about that. I don't want to shout too much because otherwise they'll complain. Sorry, can you guys all hear at the back there? Okay. Just yell out if you want me to repeat anything. Sorry. So what have we got here now? We've got content all over the place, not particularly well managed. Well, in some cases not managed at all. Perhaps my private cloud, where I've got perhaps my traditional system, or I've got SharePoint in play, and I'm managing it perhaps with RecordPoint or other tools. Great, I've got record management around that. I might have record management around some of the content that I've got in the cloud potentially, because I'm unified communications. I might be dragging back audit trails so I can manage and understand what people have been communicating, how they've been using that phone system. I might be managing email potentially, because again I can use a plugin for that plugs it into my IRMS. But there's a whole bunch of other things here with X's against them. Talked about Dropbox, OneDrive for Business, which many of your IT colleagues go, brilliant, I get X million terabytes of storage in the cloud. That'll save me a heck of a lot of money. I don't have to buy servers anymore. Now, from a records point of view, you're looking at that and going, oh my God, what's that going to mean? So everyone gets basically this massive file share in the cloud that is totally unmanaged, that God knows what they're putting in there. So again, you've got this, I suppose, tension and between the desire to move to the cloud and see those cost savings and the ability to manage that content appropriately and put records control around it. So what's the solution? Our view is that it's actually a policy-based solution. Let's break down the boundaries between those information silos. Rather than saying it has to be brought back into the filing cabinet, it has to be brought back into the repository. You know, all records have to be in the EDRMS. All content has to be stored in the EDRMS. We know historically that that hasn't worked, even with file shares out there. If you have managed to get it to work, then fantastic, but it's really hard slog to get that to happen. So our view is that you sort of need to go with the flow with this, because it's only going to get worse with the cloud, and it's to apply a policy-driven approach to it, where you're not actually looking at the individual systems, but you're looking at it more from the content point of view, from the information point of view. The content in Dropbox, it might be documents. It's the same as the content that exists in Office 365 in SharePoint. In some ways, it's the same as an email. It's information that we're classifying based on particular function activity type models as an example. You don't really care what type of content it is, and you don't really care where it's stored as long as you've got visibility of it and you can control it. So that's really what we're trying to do at RecordPoint, is move away from that model of the tin and move to a model where it's actually about the nature of the information and how you can apply policy to that information. Oh, and there's a cheesy whizzing graphic. So the idea there is suddenly we end up in this situation where we can manage this content based on these rules, this policy that we set centrally, and we apply it to all of these repositories. So I suppose some principles there that we've articulated in our view of how things should operate. So a true cloud-based record solution should not sacrifice business process for records outcomes, or importantly for you guys, vice versa. We should be able to have our cake and eat it here. We shouldn't cripple the end user experience or their desire to use these tools, which are very effective tools from a knowledge point of view. But equally, we have our obligations under the various legislation. We need to actually adhere to those. The cloud provides a world where there is freedom for business to scale and grow their workforce, and records teams can apply controls to content from a centralized place. So again, the philosophy here is you guys should have the ability to go to a place where you can see all of this content no matter where it sits, and apply policy to that content and dispose of that content. It doesn't have to be in the repository, it can be anywhere. And then finally, look at significantly reducing the maintenance and upgrade costs that you often experience with on-premises solutions. I mean, we've all been there, we've done upgrades, they're painful, you've got to run through testing, etc. You move to a cloud-based model, that pain is dealt with by the person who's selling you the cloud solution. So as an example, our cloud-based solution, we will upgrade every month, and our customers don't have to see any of that. Whereas if you think about an on-premise situation, normally you're going, well, okay, we're going to have to do the upgrade project, that's 6 months of planning, and then we'll do it, and then we'll have to test it, etc., etc. So you're starting to move away from that kind of model. So you're using the most modern available technologies immediately rather than having to wait for those. So yes, just to summarize here, we're connecting to those various content sources that are relevant to the business, and then using this centralized policy model to manage that content where it sits. We may over time bring it back into an archive if we want to, but that's not necessary in this model. Sorry, this is probably pretty hard to see. It's a representation of RecordPoint's record browser. And I can't see it on this screen, so I'm not sure you guys will be able to see it on that screen. And look, I'm happy to show this to anyone who's interested in a bit of a deeper dive later. But the idea of this browser view here is what we're using search as the basis for bringing all of that content together. In this case, I've got content that's on a file share that's in SharePoint Online, Office 365, and in an on-prem instance of SharePoint. But from a records point of view, it's all brought together into the one spot. Because it's a search index, I can slice and dice that any way I like. I can look at it in terms of its position on the file plan. I can look at it based on, other metadata, like what have I got up for destruction in the next 10 days. Great, I can create a report out of that and then action that. It doesn't matter where that content is held. It could be held anywhere. So going back to the Rubik's Cube, what we're really trying to do is solve that cube. Although I'm not sure that one, to be honest, is solvable looking at it. But the idea is we can address those concerns about the diverse types of content and also address those concerns about where that content sits now. And my firm belief, and I'm really interested in feedback on this from your perspectives and what you're seeing out there in your organizations, is we can't control easily unless potentially you're a public safety, security organization. We can't control our users in the ways that we would like. We can't make them do the things that we would like to be good records managers, because they're not records managers and they don't get this stuff. So how do we take that away from them? How do we apply that policy centrally so we have control of that information, we can manage it appropriately, but we don't break what the user is trying to do? So from a takeaways point of view, I suppose this is the summary, and again these slides will be available to you guys afterwards, and I'm happy to discuss any of these in further detail. So government supporting a cloud-first strategy for all agencies. I think the problem with government, and I've seen this in Australia, the US, and in the UK, and Scotland as well, is that government will say cloud first, but actually don't really give you any help around what that means and how you can manage that, and they don't really understand the implications of that, particularly from an information management point of view. It's all very well saying it's good and it's cheap, but what does that mean and what are the implications? So I think as a profession and as an industry from a records point of view, and from a vendor point of view, we need to help you guys figure out, well, what does that mean and how can I leverage that opportunity without creating this god-awful mess in terms of managing records and managing the content that's generated from these systems. Obviously, there's the economic benefits that we're seeing as well, and that's true of commercial organizations just as much as government. But recognizing as well that we've got to embed a solution here that is flexible enough to deal with these challenges going forward. I mean, even if you say to me now, look, we're not going to the cloud, I can't see us going to the cloud. Believe me, you will do eventually. So it's actually looking at solutions that have a path and a roadmap that will deal with cloud content in the future, even if it doesn't need to do it now from your particular point of view. Connecting to many repositories to a singular records cloud, so concept of the records cloud almost. So this cloud sits around all these other clouds, but provides that level of management and visibility that you need as a records manager. Using the same tools to manage those repositories, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. So there's a consistent experience for you guys too. That's really important. You're not having to change the tools that you use. You're using one set of tools to manage this content no matter where it is. One policy we talked about. And taking advantage of technology and innovations. I mentioned that at the beginning of the presentation. I mean, some of the stuff that Microsoft are doing in Office 365 for us as information management professionals is amazing, and not being able to take advantage of that would be, in my view, would be a real shame. So moving to this cloud model, moving to a model where you can take advantage of those innovations when they come, or at least assess whether they're of value to you and your organization, I think is really important, because you can be ahead of the game here. Because the trouble is the organization might start to use these tools and you'll be left behind unless you've got an answer to actually get ahead of that and say, well, look, that's cool, but I need to be able to manage this content. The way I'm going to do that is through these tools that I've got. So you're not seen as a roadblock, you're not getting in the way of that innovation, you're actually participating and in some ways driving that innovation. Hey, we could use these tools because I can still manage them as records, but they'll be of tremendous benefit to the business. So finally, that last point, maximum business and records benefits. Let's have our cake and eat it here. We should be able to. We shouldn't have to compromise anymore with these things. Sorry, this sounds a bit like a polemic, but I seriously believe this. Over time, we've ended up compromising either our experience as records managers or the user experience with the way that we've approached this in the past. So let's build a model which has zero compromise, that allows you to be compliant and allows you to meet the needs of those users. And you know, that's an offer, I suppose, that's the sales pitch at the end. We can help you. So myself and Andy, who's at the back there, happy to have a chat about any of these things if you want to talk about them. And even conceptually, forget about RecordPoint, but how do I manage these challenges around cloud content? And how do we manage this hybrid model which either exists now in your organization, whether you realize it or not, or will do soon? Finally, I suppose just to summarize what we provide at the moment, and we'll expand on this over time. We've got this concept of the connector suite. So RecordPoint's philosophy moving forward will not be to bring content back into the repository. It will be about managing records in place no matter where they are. And the first three that are available now that we put out there is 365 Connect to manage Office 365 content, Social Connect to manage social media, Yammer, Facebook and Twitter, and File Connect, which allows you to manage the cloud that nobody wants to talk about, otherwise known as file shares. So you can manage content in place in a file share without the need to migrate it into the system and apply records control there. And finally, that wraps it up for me. I wanted to leave plenty of time for people to challenge me, tell me I'm talking rubbish. I don't know, hopefully agree with me. I'm really interested, how did that make sense? Is that something? Yeah, please. Sorry. Yeah, look, I've got one on my laptop that I could absolutely show you. Sorry. Oh, I beg your pardon. It's about the template of how the rules are created to create that policy, and do we have one we could show? And absolutely, I've got that on my laptop. It's not here, unfortunately. It's just PowerPoint, but I can certainly show you how that works. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the question is around information security.
Yep. Yep.
Security and ability to access personal information within cloud-based software, and I'm just thinking from ourselves,
Yeah, look, I think that is actually a really difficult question to answer because literally the jury's still out on it. So the question was, sorry, just to let everyone know, it's about, I suppose, the jurisdictional controls around content. So if we go down a Microsoft path, great, they're an American company. There's a legal case at the moment, which is around Hotmail, in fact, where the FBI, the Department of Justice in the States, has asked for information about a particular user who's actually an Irish user of Hotmail, and the server is in Ireland as well. So the problem there is, how do you stop that, I suppose, overreach by the US government, bearing in mind, you know, we're UK organisations here which have particular rules about where content can reside and where it can go. I think we can control the issue of where it sits in terms of what jurisdiction it's based in, but who can access it and who can actually request somebody like Microsoft to provide that. I think the good thing is that Microsoft is fighting that tooth and nail, and they'll take that all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, personally, I think it's commercially stupid of the US government to have attempted that, because it will cripple cloud services by US providers, and people can go elsewhere for that. But I think what you'll actually see, and this is just a personal view, not based on any insights, our CTO in Seattle is very across this particular issue because it is a concern, particularly in the European market where there are very strict rules around data and of that sort. But what he's hearing is they will end up setting up a company that has nothing to do with Microsoft USA that will manage those cloud providers. So it'll provide that sort of air gap around those services. That's if worst comes to worst, because otherwise they're just not going to have a business anymore, particularly with government organisations. But I think it's a really good point. Yeah, it's a fair point. Oh, I think I can. Yeah. I can probably address. I can address the sort of day-to-day access. Yeah, they can use the NSA to get it anyway, but so a bigger issue. But in terms of actually accessing the data on a day-to-day basis, no Microsoft employee has access to your data on Azure. The way they've configured it is it's completely locked down and encrypted, such that the only people that can get to it are you. They can actually get to that data if required under law enforcement, but I think that's a really interesting point that the Information Commission has said, look, if it's due to legal process, it's not your fault that you're not in breach. But certainly those services are protected on a day-to-day basis from employees of the hosting company from actually getting access to that data. I know that's true of both Microsoft and Amazon, certainly. Can't speak for everybody else. I mean, there are problems, again, with me going, point about people like Dropbox. I have no idea what their policy is in relation to that. So that's a sort of a side issue, I suppose, that needs to be addressed. But again, what I'm trying to say here is that it's around I suppose the blocks to the use of those tools should not be either technological nor records management. They might be other reasons, such as security or privacy regulations. Oh, I agree, yeah. And again, that's why it's always worth looking at the T's and C's, yeah. But certainly I think people like Microsoft and Amazon have very strict controls around that to stop that from a day-to-day basis. Look, there's still issues potentially with hacking and cybersecurity around how people can get to the data. But fundamentally, they've got very strong controls in that area. You know, even down to setting up private government clouds in some jurisdictions. I mean, the Ministry of Defence one is their own private instance of Office 365. It's a cloud, but it's sort of their cloud. So there's different sort of models there as well. Any other questions? I mean, has anybody? Sorry, yeah. Yeah. No, it's not. It's not about somebody's personal Facebook page. It's about say you've got an official page that you use to communicate out to citizens, say as a council or something. One of our customers, the Department of Environment in Australia, they use Facebook a heck of a lot to communicate policy and that sort of thing. So they manage the records, and they are records because they're policy statements, back into RecordPoint using that social connector. Yep. No, you don't, and I think that's a broader problem with how those systems work. Yeah, if somebody's using Hotmail to send stuff around, there's not much you can do about it. I mean, you could lock those sites down and take those sorts of approaches. I mean, there's still a place for education, absolutely, but I suppose my view is if you can make it as easy as possible to do the right thing, then that gives you an out. If somebody absolutely wants to break the system and not do the right thing, they'll always find a way. I'm interested, is anybody sort of facing that hybrid thing? Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's actually bloody hard because the trouble is it's so transitory. Recreating pages, we were working on that with a customer, and they actually wanted I suppose a true rendition of the page on a particular day. And there are tools out there that will let you do that. But our approach really is we're just focused on the content. So we'll take the content out of, say, a Facebook post as an RSS feed, and then we'll store that as a record. So we are copying in that context. We're not managing in place because you can't rely on Facebook to keep the content up there. Is that the end? I think that might be it. So any other questions before I finish up? If you want to have a chat, I'll be standing over the table or around for the rest of the day.
Thank you very much to Mars.
Thank you.